What is going on, guys? I know it's been a long time, but I'm finally back, complete with my $100 repeated smashes and everything. Still can't believe I spent that much on those cards. That out of the way, today we're here to review the new cards for Jetburn, starting with none other than Best Jeanist. I'll be covering Jeanist, all of his cards, and kind of where I would start with deck building this character if it were up to me for all of his symbols. This won't be like a full deck list for the character, but it'll be like a starting point for things that kind of jump out at me and what I would be looking at to do with this character for all of his symbols. If you haven't seen the reveal video for him, you should be sure to check out My Hero Meta, who I got the, very fortunately, he was the one who got to reveal these cards. I'll be sure to include a link in the description down below. So if you haven't seen that, make sure you show him some love first. Now, it goes without saying, but these are just kind of my personal opinions, just based on the cards that we've seen so far. You know, these is always going to change if we get like a future ban list, more cards, a promo, things of that nature. I could also just be wrong. You know, I'm not perfect. You know, I might not like a card, and the card ends up incredibly busted in some deck that, you know, it's an interaction I didn't see. I'm by no means perfect. These are just my thoughts. So, with that disclaimer out of the way, let's start with Best Jeanist himself, and then get into all of his attacks and then his foundations. Jeanist is a somewhat disruptive character that tries to mess with the opponent a lot during the early parts of attack strings to make it harder for them to go all in on the character. But as your opponent keeps playing attacks that they play through his like early disruption carpool clog, he's just kind of a vanilla seven-hander. So I think if you can push through his early defenses, you won't have a hard time killing him. He does have good card selection, and between the carpool clogging and having a pretty easy block or face tank on the second attack, I don't think this will be the easiest seven-hander to kill, but I also don't think he's going to be that hard to run over as long as you keep up the pressure or you try to overload him on one turn. This will be fine on a character that can also kill their opponent in one turn. You know, Tokoyami comes to mind as like a seven-hander who just blows people up, even though he doesn't see a whole lot of play anymore. But Jeanist doesn't strike me as that kind of character. He provides +2/+2 to a single move, and that's it. It's going to be hard to kind of 100 to 0 your opponent with just your attacks and your stage, or at least consistently. This means you're going to have to block for at least a turn or two with this guy, and that's a bit of a scary proposition as a seven-hander that only gets like free defense on one attack. Doesn't mean that it's impossible, but it does mean that when you're looking at building this character, having like a solid defensive game plan to not die is going to be extremely important. On the other side of the coin, I think his offense is also a little on the honest side for me. He was +2/+2 to a single move, and other than the carpool clog, which if you squint is like +1 speed, I guess. Otherwise, his attacks are also based on offense too. He's like a very fair character, and a lot of the best decks that are running around right now are doing some very unfair stuff. I think it's just going to really limit what this character can do in the competitive scene. That kind of sucks. All in all, I don't hate Jeanist, but I don't love him either. There's definitely worse characters you could be playing, even worse seven-handers, but you have a lot of better options too. This is going to be kind of a running theme with Jeanist, but I really don't like the symbols that he's on. I think it's actually the biggest issue with this character. All Death and Good aren't exactly well known for being range-focused kits, and his entire kit is range-focused, and that's okay. We're allowed to get exploratory keywords on like new symbols, but his kit's not really strong enough to stand on his own legs compared to what a lot of the really competitive decks are doing. And the fact that he doesn't have even like a single symbol to dip into range attacks like water or chaos really holds his character back. I really would have preferred that they drop probably death or good and given this guy either water or chaos. They don't have to swap up both. They're allowed to have like two exploratory symbols, but give him like a safety symbol, I guess. Personally, I prefer water. Water more directly plays with ranged than chaos does. And we'll get to it later, but man, his boss attack, his like ultra rare, would be incredible with Tongue Whip. But unfortunately, we have to work with what they give us. Overall, I got to give Jeanist like a 5 out of 10, and that's about the best that I can do. I think it's like a character you could play at locals and have a fun time with, and maybe like at a softer locals, or you know, if you run really well, you could win. But I don't see this guy seeing a ton of play at like PSCs or even RLEs, and if he does, I don't see him doing very well. I'd be genuinely kind of surprised if this character was able to top at like a large 200-man event. With that out of the way, let's get into his attacks and hopefully see if those fare a little better. Going in rarity order, we're going to start with Stylish Strike. This attack, in my opinion, is really tame. It tries to provide this like catch-22 where if your opponent blocks it, Jeanist gets to do his like card pull stuff, and if they don't block it, you get to draw cards, but I think a lot of the time people are just going to block this attack because Jeanist is going to get his carpool clog anyways. assuming that, they're planning on blocking an attack at all. Some characters are just going to face tank this and kill you on the backswing. But if your opponent's interested in playing defense, I think they just always block this move, just to deny you the draw too, or at least most of the time. And then it goes without saying, but outside of Jeanist, I don't see anybody ever registering this card. So this one's kind of a miss for me. Granted, it's only his common, so it's not a big deal that it's a miss, but it is what it is. We're going to move on to his next one now. Viper Capture is actually a pretty decent opener, I think, for Jeanist. It's a beefy 3/6. It's kind of scary to not block. And if our opponent blocks it with a non-attack card, we give our next attack stun too. This also presents a catch-22 for our opponent, but the difference is that, like with Fiber Capture, where it's not very scary to block the attack, this attack it's kind of scary to block, and it's very scary to not block. So either choice is like kind of dangerous. So I like this card a lot more for Best Jeanist, just as like an opener. Again, goes without saying, but I'd be surprised if it sees much play outside of Jeanist, but Jeanist in particular will probably be interested in at least a few copies of these. This is actually one of his better attacks, at least for him. Moving on to his rare, Stylish Threads. This attack is so close for me. This attack reads like it should be so good. It is powerful. It has a way to become unblockable against like certain attacks. Like it has all these tools that don't really coalesce because Jeanist loads attacks into his opponent's card pool, and that's it. So you can't load like a Faith Shield or an Evading Copy, some kind of like defensive card. And you don't even have a way to peek into your opponent's hand. So you're like guessing or hoping that they're trying to block with a duplicate with this card. And if you guess wrong, you just get blown out for it, especially if you invest some momentum in it. And other than that, this card doesn't do anything. This attack is like really close to being good, and if Jeanist had some kind of way to like scout the opponent's hand, I could actually see this, but as it is, this is a pass. And now we have his ultra rare Fiber Web combo. This is another one of those cards that, this is why I wish he was on water, man. Like, this thing combos off ranged. If you want to play this card, you have to warp like your entire attack lineup around it. When you look at the range options on these symbols, there's not really a lot of like cohesion outside of the attacks that he gets, of course. Again, if this guy had like water or chaos, imagine getting to go like, I don't know, Frigid Heatwave into Twisting Azure Inferno with +2/+2, and then some damage pump to trigger the ability, and then play this on effectively a 5, and it gets the speed pump, and it's a throw, and has all this damage. Like that would be so good. Or like any water attack into like a Tongue Whip into this thing, or heaven forbid Tongue Whip into this thing, just to drain your opponent out of lows. Again, like the synergies this attack would have on chaos and water, like, it's just insane to me he doesn't have one of these symbols, but it is what it is. As it is, this attack is like, it's basically a 3-0 for 8 most of the time. I imagine sometimes a little more, sometimes a little less, but that's like the ballpark you'll be working with. And as a throw, that's like a beefy stat line, but it's an easy block. Your opponent will get in for 4 damage, and that's all that it does. This would be fine as part of like a more scary attack chain of good range cards. Like I said, a lot of the range cards on these symbols are like a little rough to work with or easy to block. And it's just, I don't know, man. Like I think you want to play Jeanist, you probably dip into range cards, but you don't want to go all in to play cards like this. It's just you don't have enough payoffs for it. Overall, I think Jeanist's attack foundation, or attack lineup rather, is actually kind of bad. He wants to play this like dedicated ranged game because of his ultra rare, but the card pool that he's on just doesn't support it, and a lot of his other attacks are either not good or they're very close, which leaves him, it's like very hard to play like a dedicated range game. And if you get too far away from that, you're probably better off playing other characters. I think the biggest thing, or the most, like the biggest saving grace, I guess, to Jeanist is that you can kind of play that like 50-50 game if you want to, and that might be like okay, you know, if you play like some range attacks and some like quality attacks on whatever symbol that you're on, you might find like some success there. And that's certainly what I would like recommend starting out. I think playing like a dedicated range game with this character is just, you're gonna have a bad time even at your locals. Hopefully when we get into his foundations, we'll get a little bit more quality out of them, so Jeanist can see the light of day. Let's see what those look like. Starting off, we have Styling Bakugo, which I don't think is very good. Commit for +1 damages, and that's it, is a really bad exchange. The Rider effect on this card is very scary, but if your opponent blocks the attack, even partial blocks it, you don't get the Rider. Without a way to guarantee that Rider effect, a lot of the times this is just going to end up as commit for nothing, because your opponent's going to block the attack, and if it's full blocked, you don't even get the damage. If they partial block, roughly half the time, you don't even get the damage. Probably more than half the time, because a lot of attack values end up being odd in my experience. So I think a lot of times this is just going to be a pass, personally. But it's also only his common foundation, so it's no biggie. Under his other common, we have Fashion Icon. This is his speed reset. I actually kind of like this card. It's a 2-5 speed reset, and a lot of resets have a 4 check. So this gives you a 5 difficulty, or I'm sorry, a 5 control option to, if you want like a dedicated speed reset. And Jeanist can get a little extra mileage out of this because he copies off any card in card pool. So if you load like a really slow attack, you can flip to reset to like a lower value, so you get even, you get lower than a reset, and that's kind of neat. And that being said, resets as it is don't see a lot of play. I don't know if a dedicated speed reset with a better control value is gonna like get there. But I hope this card might see a little play. I guess I don't know, it's not the most promising thing, but for a common, it's not bad. All right, now on to something that has some potential, and man, if this had Water Art Chaos would have a ton of potential. Number 3 Pro Hero. This card is very promising. The ability to flip and pick up a range attack so you can then block with it later is, I mean, already it's like flip to draw an attack, which is great value. But in Jeanist, it's even better because he really wants to block the first attack thrown with a range attack on defense, so that way when he triggers his second response, he gets a draw off. So this lets you not only like flip to pick up an attack, but you can then use that attack to block with, and you'll get another attack off your character on top of triggering your character's block response. So this is like, I don't know if other characters are going to be super interested in this, but Jeanist is going to make this card look very good. Wrapping up his foundations, we have Always Cool. This card's kind of neat to me, and it has like some okay interactions with things like Small Limber, and on good you can get some mileage in with like Hardened Jabs, I suppose, or Chops for that matter. Personally, I don't think it would have been the end of the world if you could clear this card out of your card pool. It would have some insane synergy with Capture Net, but Capture Net doesn't see a lot of play, and it's also something that Jeanist plays well, so it'd be like a thing Momo does maybe. I think that would be okay, but it is what it is. Universally, you could also use it with Bright Future, but because it's stuck in your card pool, I think it's a little limited. You're going +1 foundation for +1 progressive for the turn, which is usually a bad exchange rate. I could see situations where it's not, of course, but most of the time I think it's a bad exchange. The more appealing part of it, though, is the damage lock. There's a lot of characters, decks right now that are pumping attacks to like crazy high value, and locking an attack's damage isn't quite destroyed to cancel because you still have to deal with the baseline attack, and some attacks have really scary like Rider abilities, but it's pretty close. And frankly, some of the really scary Rider abilities have a stat contingency. Like just off the top of my head, Twisting Azure Inferno comes to mind. Again, is a very popular ability, card that's like got a scary ability, but if you can't modify its damage, it'll never get to 7, so it'll never get its enhance. So this card in particular, I think out of everything that comes out of Best Jeanist kit, is going to see some amount of play, if not in the main boards, then at least in sideboards, as a way to punish certain attacks, like definitely like giant bombs. So I think this is like probably the highlight of his kit, and it sucks that it's just like one of his foundations. And even then, it's like sideboard tech probably, maybe main board of like 1 or 2 copies, but I guess that's all Best Jeanist gets. All in all, I think Jeanist cards and his like overall kit are way too fair. I think it's fine for the character to be fair and just, play like an interactive game that cares about what the opponent is doing. But he really needed some better attacks and foundations overall to support that game plan if they want to print a character like this on no symbols that support that kind of engine. He might get better if we get like a really cracked promo, like a PSC promo maybe, something like that, or he gets like a secret rare that's nuts. That would help him a lot. But as it is, I don't know. I know people are going to experiment with cards like these, but for me, I think Best Jeanist was better off just staying dead and waiting for like another set to come out from retirement. That being said, I do get that people are going to want to play him, and not every character needs to be super competitive. So with that being said, we're going to cover all of his symbols and just some like general tips that I have on how I would go about at least starting to build the character on those symbols, some things to like consider. Starting with all. Jeanist probably has the slimmest options on range attacks in all out of all of his symbols. But the few that he does have access to can put in some work. Obviously, he has fiber capture as like a decent opener from his own kit, but he'll always have access to that. But I think Surging Crystal Darts actually is a great both opener and a card to play as like on a 6. It's just a giant stat stick as like a 7 diff, or as a 6 diff as a 7 high 7 that also gets stats afterwards. Like it's like a beefy bomb. But you can also just play it like out the gate as a decent stat stick that will also trigger the draw if you're like a range requirement. I think those make for good like range opening attacks. And then talking defense, it's a little unusual of a selection, but I think Chronostasis trigger actually pulls a lot of weight in this character. The fact that you can block with a Chronostasis trigger as like into anything because it's the mid block, and you'll at least get a partial with that. You'll break or 2. You'll get your character's response to clog your opponent's card pool, so they're basically like breaker 3'd. And if they do play another attack, you get the draw afterwards. There's like a lot of value there, and I think that's probably where I'd start with the range attacks. And at that point, I'd be looking at like quality all attacks. Bird and Earning come to mind, but if you want to get spicy, Surging Crystal Darts is actually a weapon, so you could even run like a small weapon package with this character, which has been done before, but it does fit here. Notably, Binding Shoulder Rush is a card I'm actually a big fan of because it combos off of any attack, so you can play anywhere the string. Well, such an incredible flow card because it's basically always a 4 diff is like the best way to think about it, and it also makes the next attack you play easier to play as well. You could do something like Surging Crystal Darts, play Binding Tackle as like a very beefed up move as like a 6 mid 8, and then from there you've got whatever weapons you want to throw in on all. You've got some options between Stain and Eraserhead. You'd probably go with mostly Eraserhead. You'd probably be better off just playing Eraserhead, but I think if you want to play a character like this, I think it's like a good way to start. Foundation-wise, I think he gets a lot of work specifically out of Talented Baker and Challenging the Fakes, which we'll talk about in a bit. Talented Baker is kind of self-explanatory. He draws a card on his second attack forward, and Baker draws cards or gives speed as soon as you've drawn a card. So it's an easy fit. It's just like a repeatable stat pump. Challenging the Fakes, though, that's a card that I think is going to put in a lot of work with this character because he was really incentivized to block that first attack. And on that second attack, the fact that you can flip Challenge the Fakes and basically breaker to your opponent's second attack, very gross. And because you have to face tank that second move, the -1 damage takes the edge off. -2 plus -1 for a total -3 can actually makes it acceptable to take some moves to the face. Some smaller second attacks aren't that huge. And -3 will make it even as a 7-hander health pool of 19, you can just afford to eat that. If it's only a few points of damage, and then between the card pool clog and the 2 breaker 2s, your opponent's going to have to back off. As we talked about, Jeanist is a character that's probably going to need 2, sometimes even 3 turns of steady aggression to get kills. So he needs strong defensive game plans. And out of all of the symbols, this is the only one that I see where you have easy access to multiple breaker 2s or breaker 2-esque effects in a row. Very tempting. Definitely not a card I would sleep on if you built this guy in Hall. Give it a try. Now, onto Death, going from the least to the most options for range attacks on symbol. Death actually has a lot, but they tend to bleed into the Fury package. Nitro Explosion Ignition is an immediate card that just looks like a great fit for Jeanist, as long as you can find ways to remove cards from your card pool. You want to play the attack early, it's fast, your opponent's somewhat likely to just eat the 4 damage because they're more worried about future attacks, which means you can get away with playing some copies of Instant Explosive Release if you want to. I think you could do some really neat stuff with this character offensively with obviously his own starter and just Nitro, and then play Furies. Foundation wise though, things get a little tougher. He doesn't really have a lot of super crazy interactions with any of the Death foundations like I talked about, and the only thing you can do on Death that's kind of neat is you can recycle the breaker 2s using his own foundation, but you can do that with Chronostasis trigger on all as well. And on all, you have a follow-up to that breaker 2 with Challenge of the Fakes. And Death, you don't really have that. The best thing I guess you have is Learning the Standard. Sorry, I had to look that one up. I was pulling a huge blank. And admittedly, going and breaker 2ing your first attack, getting in the range, getting in the draw using Naval Laser Beam is good. And then you could use Learning the Standards and have a similar result and probably end someone's turn. But But the difference is that Death has like a more cohesive like focus on Furies compared to All, where the attack package is kind of all over the place. And we just have better Fury characters than Jeanist. I'm sure people will try to figure this character out, but I don't know. It's Death to me seems like a bit of a tough sell. When you have powerhouses like Eraserhead 1, or frankly even like Shiggy 3, if you want to play like other like dedicated like speed pumping characters. I don't know. I'm down to be proven wrong on this, but I don't see Death being his best symbol. So Good is a weird one because he has access to a few high quality range attacks, but most of them you don't want to play later in early in the string as like an opener. Obviously, you could play Specialized Sound Waves or Cannon Blast, but those are both attacks that you want to play later in the string. Sound Waves, admittedly, you could also play in All, but we actually have a couple of range openers on All, so we don't have to look at Sound Waves. The one thing that Good does have going for it is Pigeon Flock, which is something that Momo has put to a ton of use. Pigeon Flock gives you access to building in range ally cards, which will probably be either Friend of Animals or the new card Heroic Assistance as like another way to hit on stun. Good already has a lot of stun hate, but this kind of pushes it up to another level. But this is kind of my problem from Jeanist, is that from there, if you're playing like Pigeon Flock and these like quality good cards, you're probably going to end up on punches after that for the back half of your attack lineup. And if you're going to play Pigeon Flock, punches, and quality good cards, you could just play Momo. I mean, we just saw Broberg win an RLE with Momo. On Good, no less. And if you don't want to play Momo, you could play like any variety of good characters. Muriel, All Might 3, Deku 4, I guess, although I think he's a little outclassed. You've got a lot of options. I just don't see why you'd play this character on Good over anything else. It's something you can't. You can make it work, but it's not even suboptimal. You're just like a copycat. You're not doing anything like even like remotely kind of unique that makes Best Jeanist stand out. And this again goes back to why I wish he had like either a Water or Chaos, because he just really doesn't jive with the cards on his symbol very well, at least in my opinion. I mean, like the card pool would be incredible with Water, but here we are. That's going to wrap up my review on Best Jeanist. I know it was kind of harsh, and I wish I had more positive feedback for this character, but it's honestly how I feel. I just don't think he's very good. I want to like this guy, and he's almost there. I don't know, maybe he'll get like a new promo, or we'll see like a really crazy ban list that shifts things where this is like a more prominent option, but as it is right now, this is like a locals character you sleeve up to play for fun, but I would not recommend taking this guy to a PSC or heaven forbid an RLE. I think you're going to have a bad time if you do that. That being said, make sure you check out my next video, which will be coming out very soon, where I review Dobby 3, which is a character I am, spoiler alert, much more excited for. Once again, I know it's been a while, but thank you for entering the chamber. And I'll see you in the next one, guys. Bye.